Good day.
Hello. Hi, Frank. And hi,
Hey,
Peter.
Hi, Frank. How's everyone doing?
So, well, doing well. Well, getting over a cold. But other than that, well, how are you, Frank?
I am on my way to make some money, so I'm good.
What
So,
could go wrong?
welcome, Frank and everyone, to Talking Back to Suicide. And our special guest today is Frank King. And I understand that you have been a writer, a comedy writer, right, for The Tonight Show for maybe
Yep.
20 years,
Mhm.
uh, have a mental health history, suicidal ideation. You're a renowned speaker on suicide prevention, and you're also a bodybuilder. So, and we're delighted to have you join us, today. Uh,
I'm delighted to be here.
yeah. So maybe we could begin with comedy, right? Comedy and what the host of Human Emotion, right? How did you get involved in being a comedy writer?
Well, it all began in fourth grade. I was 9 years old. I told my first joke. The kids laughed. The teacher was hysterical. She was laughing so hard she excused herself to go to the teacher's lounge. And I thought to myself at age 9, I'm going to be a stand-up comedian. And
Do you
then,
remember the joke? What was the joke?
oh well,
Yeah.
my entire family. It was actually an ad lib. My entire family is nearsighted, really nearsighted. And so since then, I've written a joke that we are, I believe, descended from the people of the island of Myopia, which is a fancy word for nearsighted. Myopia, by the way, was conquered over and over because the native population never saw the enemy coming. But at the time, it was in the 1960s, late 60s, late 60s, and I had to wear glasses. But back then, they didn't have fashion frames like they have nowadays. I had these black plastic glasses with little rockets on the temple pieces, and I just hated them because I'm vain, was vain and vain. So I refused to wear them. Well, my teacher, Mrs. Dark, knew that I had to have them on to see the board. So she thought what was holding me back was that the other kids were going to make fun of me when they saw me with my glasses. So she decided to go ahead and tear the Band-Aid off all at once. She got me up to the front room, turned me away from the class, put my glasses on me, turned me back to the class, and said, "See, you look intelligent." And I looked up at her and said, "Yes, that would explain all the laughter." And she said years later when I saw her at the grocery store, the funniest thing a child had ever said before or since. And she went to the teacher's lounge because she was laughing so hard. She thought I might misinterpret her laughter and have my feelings hurt. And then she said, "What are you doing for a living now, Frank?" And I said, "I'm a stand-up comedian." And she said, "Duh." So then in 12th grade, I took 3 years of drama in high school. I never got a speaking part in any of the school plays. And I believed I was seeing a pattern. So it occurred to me that if I did stand up at the talent show, I could write, direct, produce, and star in my own little show every night. So I did stand up at the 12th grade talent show. Nobody had ever done stand up before, and I won, although I beat the accordion player and the folk dancers. So it wasn't a real tough victory, but still a victory nonetheless. And I told my mother I'm going to California to be a comedian. My mother's big into education. She goes, "No, son, you're going to college first. I don't care what you do when you get done. You can be a goat herder for all I care, but you're going to be a goat herder with a college degree." So I went to Carolina, UNC Chapel Hill, got a couple of college degrees and bolted for the West Coast. First open mic night 40 years ago last month. Halfway through my 5-minute set, I heard a voice inside my head say, "You're home." My second thought was, I'm going to do this for a living. Of course, I had no idea how. 18 months later, I said to my girlfriend, now my wife of 37 years, "I'm going on the road to be a stand-up comedian. You want to come along for the ride?" And I figured she'd go, "Oh, hell no." She goes, "Yeah." So we gave up our apartment and our jobs, jumped into my tiny little Dodge Colt, and we were on the road together, comedy club to comedy club, for 2,629 nights in a row nonstop. 7 years and change. And then the little radio, morning radio. And then when I got fired, because there's two kinds of people in radio, people who've been fired, people who are going to be fired. I was going to go back on the road, but there was no road to go back to. The comedy clubs were closing faster than opening. So my act was very clean, is very clean. I thought I can do corporate comedy, after dinner, after lunch. So that's what I did. I made the jump to corporate comedy. And every now and then somebody says, what's the difference between a club comic and a corporate comic? Roughly $5,000 a night plus travel. I'm no math major, but that made sense to me. Although some of my hardcore purist comedian friends thought I'd sold out. You sold out. You went corporate. Yes, that's true. I'm a prostitute, but I'm a high-paying prostitute. So, and then in 2010, with a recession, bookings dried up practically overnight. We lost everything in a Chapter 7 bankruptcy. That's when I learned what the barrel of my gun tasted like. Spoiler alert, I did not pull the trigger. A friend of mine at a keynote last year had never heard me say the line, I didn't pull the trigger. He came up and said, and I quote, hey man, how come you didn't pull the trigger? I said, hey man, could you try to sound slightly less disappointed? So when speaking came back, speakers bureaus and meeting planners said to me, Frank, we love you. We just cannot pay you to be funny, just funny. $5,000. You've got to teach the audience something. Well, I had no idea what. I'd always wanted to do that. I'd always wanted to make a difference. And I bought a book by a woman named Judy Carter called The Message of You, Turn Your Life into a Money-Making Speaking Career. And I went into it thinking I got nothing. And halfway through, because she kind of walks you through, holds your hand through the process, halfway through I thought, oh my gosh, I do have something to talk about. Given my near suicide, I have 2 mental illnesses. There are more nuts in my family than in a squirrel turd. I could keynote on suicide prevention if I got some training, which I did. Second hurdle. I've been doing comedy for 2.5 decades. Who's going to take me seriously? My wife said, do a TEDx. I said, what's a TEDx? Just happened to get an application that week from TEDx in Canada. I auditioned, I got it. That was my first one. I just did my 13th TEDx on mental health. So that allowed me to prove to everybody that I could do something very, very, very serious with humor. And I've been doing that since my first TEDx talk in 2014.
Wow.
Wow. What's that phrase about what clowns laughing? Like that they have like the exterior smile, but inside they're crying. What do you think of that?
Well, people ask me, does comedy help me cope with my mental illness, my major depressive disorder, and chronic suicidal ideation? And oddly, the answer is no. It's not a coping mechanism for me. In addition to having mental illness run rampant through my family, so does comedy, a sense of humor. Most, if not all, of my relatives are very funny. So the two coexist. I believe my mental illness, suicidality, and depression are just the flip side of my comedic ability, imagination, creativity. I can teach you to write stand-up. I can teach you to perform stand-up. I cannot teach you how to process the incoming information the way my brain does. So it's not really a coping mechanism for me. It's just part of my personality.
Frank, you mentioned a few times mental illness through your family. Could you say more about that?
Yes, we have something called generational depression and suicide. My grandmother died by suicide. My mother found her. My great aunt died by suicide. My mother and I found her. I was 4 years old. I screamed for days. And if you're that close to an actual suicide, and I don't think anybody could have gotten any closer because it's a horrific story. I'll share with you if you would like. We need to issue a trigger warning. It's gruesome. If you're that close to an actual suicide, and you're already hardwired for suicide, the chances of you giving serious thought to ending your life later in life go up. And that's what I believe happened in 2010, is, being hardwired for it, being that close to a suicide, it just seemed like the thing to do.
So this was your mother's mother died by suicide?
Yes, and her aunt.
And her sister died by suicide?
And I believe my mother died by suicide slowly, cigarettes and alcohol.
And what was there psychiatric treatment for either your grandmother or your aunt?
Well, my grandmother saw a psychologist, I believe, but she says in her suicide note, which I have, doctors have done all they could, but still, and she knew that if she wound down far enough, she would be institutionalized. And we're talking mid 1940s. And so the facilities for the mental institutions were certainly not pleasant places back then. So she didn't want to end up there. So I think that's part of the reason she died by suicide.
To your knowledge, were there any like bipolar type symptoms, extreme mood swings, psychotic symptoms, hearing voices, delusions, any sense if there was a psychiatric illness going on? Because of course, that you don't have to have a diagnosed psychiatric illness to die by suicide.
No, no, you do not. No, as far as I know, it was simply major depressive disorder and chronic suicidal ideation, probably. Chronic suicidal ideation is very rare. It's not in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Big Book of Diseases. It means for me and people like me, people in my tribe, the option of suicide is always on the menu as a solution for problems large and small. And I tell the audience, when I say small, my car broke down a couple of years ago. I had 3 thoughts unbidden. 1, get it fixed. 2, buy new. And 3, I could just kill myself. That's chronic suicidal ideation. The benefit of telling that story out loud every time I keynote is almost every time I keynoted, there's been at least one person in the audience, sometimes more, that have that illness. They don't know it has a name. They think, because of the way they think, they're just freaks and completely alone. I had a young woman come up after a college presentation and say, "Thanks for the keynote." I said, "You're welcome." She said, "But I got to tell you, it made me weep." I said, "How did it make you weep?" She said, "You know your story about the car, get it fixed, buy new, and kill yourself?" I said, "Yeah." She goes, "I've been having those thoughts all my life. I didn't know that had a name. I thought I was just some kind of freak and completely alone. And when I heard you say that out loud, I realized for the first time in my life that I'm not alone, and I wept." That's the ROI of starting the conversation on suicide.
How did your mom approach you about what had happened to your grandmother and to your aunt? Was that a topic of conversation?
No, I blocked it out for decades. My mother created a myth. Everyone in the family, every adult in the family was told, if Frank brings it up, you are to tell him, yes, she died by suicide, but when you found her, she was in a refrigerator. When you found her, she was in the refrigerator with her hands folded in prayer looking serene. And so decades later, probably 2012, I repeated that story to my cousin who was 10 years older than I. And he had been told the myth he was supposed to share with me if I ever asked about it. And he said, "Serene my ass, the old bat fell out on top of you." And it all came rushing back.
And what about your own mental health growing up?
Actually, I even though my dad died at 40 of a heart attack on my birthday and Thanksgiving, and even though I've been living with this, I assume since I came out of the hatch, then I don't remember being depressed all the way through high school. A lot of people don't like high school. I loved high school. I almost stayed an extra year. And then I got to college, and my girlfriend moved away to go to another college thousands of miles away. And I'll bet you what I thought was just heartbroken and sad was my depression. And I didn't have my first thought of suicide until 1984, January. I was selling insurance, which I was miserable doing. I was married to my high school sweetheart, a wonderful woman. We had no business being married. So I'm married and miserable, selling insurance and miserable, and I'm not going to open mic night, which is where I think I belong, because my first wife, that was not her idea of what I should be doing. So I'm driving home down Highway 163 in San Diego about 5 in the evening. It's raining. And for the first time ever, I had that thought, why don't you just kill yourself? Whoa! My second thought was, wait a minute. I could divorce my wife, quit my job, try comedy. If it works, great. If it doesn't, hell, I can always kill myself. And I have a TEDx talk called Suicide, the Secret of My Success for that very reason. If I had not divorced my wife and quit my job and tried comedy, I was going to kill myself sooner rather than later. So really, unlike most people who try stand-up comedy, I had nothing to lose. If I didn't do it, I'm going to die. So, people talk about burning the boats. Yeah, I burned them to the water line because that, if it works, great. If it doesn't, I wouldn't be talking to you right now.
And I'd like you to say a little bit more about that mental health journey. So there you had a suicidal thought, and at that time, were there other clinical symptoms of depression? Were you not sleeping or sleeping too much, or your appetite changed, or loss of interest, or can't concentrate? Or was it more so having intrusive suicidal thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's chronic suicidal ideation. It's it's in my DNA, and so it was thoughts of suicide every now and then. It still happens. I still have those thoughts. Oftentimes, you talk to people who have chronic suicidal ideation, you hear several familiar stories. One is I'm driving down the highway, I look up ahead, there's a bridge abutment, and I'm thinking, if I just turn my steering wheel a little bit, that would be that. And that's a very common experience for people with suicidal ideation. Or you're sitting at a train, railroad track, train crossing, and you're looking at the train thinking, if I pulled up on the tracks, that would be that. So it's not serious thoughts of suicide. It's, I think, under stress, it's actually a coping mechanism. Your brain says, listen, we can fix this. You're not going to like it, but we can fix this. So it's I've gotten so used to those thoughts that, it's not a serious thought. As a matter of fact, I'm 68 years old, and I was walking the dogs about a year ago, and I'm 67. And the thought of suicide, not the act, but just the topic of suicide crossed my mind. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm 67 years old. Why rush it? How long have I got anyway? I mean, if I was 37, okay, I'm looking at 30, 40 years. 67, why rush it? So the a friend of mine said if it weren't for his chronic suicidal ideation, he might have killed himself a long time ago. Because with chronic suicidal ideation, it's always on the menu. There's always an escape. I have a friend who's a mortician, and he said when people start talking suicide, when a relative dies, I get them to take suicide off the table. I said, don't take it off the table, move it to one side. Give them an out to relieve the pressure. We don't want them to do it. We hope they don't do it, but we don't want to take it off the table. We want to keep it as an option. And because I know I could kill myself anytime, because I've crossed that barrier where I'm willing to take my life, I can stand a great deal more pain. And what a lot of people don't understand is suicide is generally not wanting to kill yourself so much as wanting to end the pain.
Maybe it was about a year ago. I was in Long Island. I think it was related to a film festival that I was involved in. I'm a lyricist and collaborating with singer-songwriters on suicide prevention and postvention songs, right? So anyway, but I'm at, I believe it was a film festival, and I was taking the train into New York City from Long Island. And at the train station, there were suicide prevention signs right there. And it had, the 988 number. In fact, I even remember taking a photo of the suicide prevention, which I thought was really great that they had those signs at the train station, right? And it was at the platform where you're waiting for the train. And I also wonder, maybe there had been an increase of suicide deaths, related to jumping in front of the train, that they decided to put it there. I was thinking, though, Frank, that on one level, one can think, well, a person is much older, right? Who knows how much time you're going to have left, and death is on its way, as it were.
Yep.
But and I'm sure you know this, that there's one of the highest rates of suicide is white men that are over the age of 80. That is a very high risk group. So even being older doesn't necessarily protect one.
Well, again, because I'm willing to do it at any time, and I've got that escape valve, and because I am 67, I'm figuring, I've outlived every male in my family, because heart disease also runs rampant in the family. I've outlived all my male relatives except one cousin who's 10 years older than I. He and I we're the last of the Mohicans. I've already had 2 aortic valve replacements, a double bypass, a heart attack, and 3 stents. So I like to say I'm living on borrowed time, and I'm upside down alone.
So Kina, you've been listening. What are your thoughts so far?
Hi, Frank.
Hey.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, so much about your life and being so open and transparent about it. That's what we want the show to be about, true life stories with regards to this global pandemic in my work that is going on at the moment. So you mentioned generational suicide, generational mental illness. Now, that's a critical component to suicide. And I don't think we ever went deep into that specific component of suicide. But the first question is, after your grandmother, were there any further suicides in your family?
Well, my great aunt followed her by 9 years. My great aunt had glaucoma. My mother was preparing a granny flat at our house because she was crazy about that particular aunt. But my great aunt was of a generation where she didn't want to be a burden. In suicidality, there's an element of burdensomeness. The world would be better off without me. So she decided to end her life using that refrigerator, an old Loctite refrigerator, not one that seals with a magnetic strip, but has a latch. So once you crawl in, there's no getting out. So I think the glaucoma and the fact of her generation, she did not want to be a burden to anybody, even though my mother would be happy to have her, in the granny flat next to our house.
Aunt, was that your grandmother's sister or your mother's sister?
Grandmother's sister, my great aunt.
Your great aunt, wow.
So it's like the same bloodline,
Yeah, oh yeah, very much so.
Technically.
And she had crawled in there and my mother didn't realize it. And so my mother swings open the door and I'm holding onto her skirt tail, and my great aunt falls out and pins me to the floor. So that's why, I'm 4 years old. I screamed apparently for days.
Really horrifying.
How old were you at that time?
Say again?
I know you were young. How old were you at the time exactly?
4 years old.
So from that time of being 4 years old, till now you're in your 60s, has it been better, or has there been suicide after that in the same bloodline?
No, my niece and nephew, I believe, have some mental health issues. The good news is, because my generation, my sister has anxiety and depression, because we're all open about that, then the nieces and nephews are unafraid to mention, I think I'm having difficulty, I'm struggling, I need to see somebody, maybe take some medication. So unlike my mother's generation, very stoic, you don't talk about that, make up a story, because my sister and I in our generation are all out of the mental health closet, as it were. Then the following generation, my nieces and nephews, have no problem being forthright about their struggles. But yes, it continues.
So do you think this is a situation, because I can think of thousands of families that suffer with mental illness, but they haven't addressed the issue? Is there a solution that we can actually bring up, on the show for families to do? Is it a case of where we need to take 10 steps backwards in order to move 20 steps forward? We need to address the matter. We need to bring awareness to the matter as a family, in order to fix this and change the course for the future generations to come.
Yes, well, in my family, I don't think there's any hope for the future generations that they will not be plagued by mental health issues. However, my advice to people is get an evaluation, find out if your depression is garden variety depression or the depressive state of bipolar disorder, or what is it. I also recommend getting a physical examination because sometimes physical ailments present as mental health issues. And I recommend if medication is indicated, get the medication. However, the doctor generally only knows what the drug salesman told them. So if it's not working for you, I would get a DNA cheek swab test they have nowadays. There's half a dozen companies that do them. They take your DNA and they try to match your DNA to the psychotropic that it works best with your metabolism. And be open about it in the family. Tell everyone you know, love, and trust you have an issue so they can be there for you. But again, in my family, there's, we can be proactive, knowing we all live with this. So be on the, it's like people who have that, in the Jewish faith, there are women who are have a predisposition of breast cancer because they've got a particular gene. Seems like it starts with a B. So they're always on the lookout for, and sometimes have a prophylactic, ahead of time mastectomy to avoid. So in our family, we need to be aware these issues exist. We need to be proactive in watching for it and make sure everybody's comfortable talking about it, and then, getting treatment.
It's a family tree, The reason they call it a family tree, at times, why I said trace back is because if you got rotten branches in the tree, you need to go back to the root, and there could be something going on in your subconscious as well that's triggering, those mental illness or those, attempts to commit suicide. Like this is from a personal experience, within my own family as well. It was in 2020. It was the end of 2020, so you're in the peak of COVID, and I had this fallout. So I'm the youngest of three, and I had this fallout with my sister in December, and when it's brother and sister having it out at each other, no one really wants to admit, who's wrong and who's right. But then when I got back home, I started to put, actual thought into it of why I'm behaving in this matter at certain trigger points, within my family. There's always something that triggers and then that fallout happens. Now, it may not be depression or anxiety, but I'm just using this as an example. And the moment I started self-reflecting, taking those 10 steps back, working on my subconscious, bringing awareness to what has gone wrong, in my opinion, with my family down the blood, I started to actually transform myself and started to behave, like a proper human actually should. And I actually went to my sister a year later, even though I felt, it was her fault, I apologized for it from me after bringing awareness to it. So it's so critical, as you said, thank you so much for sharing those tips. But bringing awareness as a family to say, look, something is going on here, we need to look into it together.
Yes, and as I say in improv, yes, and oftentimes suicidality for a lot of people is situational. Mine is generally not situational. It was in 2010, but other than that, it's not based on a situation. My depression can be triggered by a situation. I have several triggers that I'm aware of. I think you should become aware, if you can, of your triggers. I have a friend of mine who lived with bipolar disorder for decades. And he said, look, Frank, this is not just chemistry. There's something triggering these bouts of depression. You need to look back 24, 48 hours and see if there's a common element. Sure enough, I found a couple of triggers. So I am aware of them, as is my wife, aware of what triggers me. But there is no trigger, as far as I can tell, for the suicidality. That's just, I've been most suicidal at some of the best times in my life. Money in the bank, condo paid off, bunch of bookings on the calendar. No particular reason to be suicidal, but it just, again, it's just in my DNA.
Frank, you mentioned earlier about suicidality and a gun. Was there a time? Was that a metaphor, or was that actually there was a thought to shoot yourself?
Oh no, not a metaphor. My wife was we had filed bankruptcy. We had lost everything. My wife was devastated. I had $1 million life insurance policy, and I thought I can solve this. So I went to the barn with a handgun while she was out shopping. I put the gun in my mouth. I pulled the hammer back to see if I could do it. Now, what Why I didn't pull the trigger is not poetic. I sold life insurance straight out of college. And I knew that every life insurance policy had a 2-year suicide clause. So if I kill myself in less than 2 years, she gets nothing. If I kill myself 2 years in a day, she gets $1 million. So I called my insurance agent. And I said, how long have I had the policy? And he said, you've had it 22 months and don't do it. Because he had, in fact, delivered checks after such a conversation in the past. So I had to wait 2 months to kill myself. And by the time 2 months was up, I don't recall thinking, hey, I can do it today. I think things got a little better. Phone call stopped. Bankruptcy went through. And, I broke the service, took a deep breath, and that's why I'm still here. My life insurance policy saved my life.
Does
I
the
had to
life
look at the
insurance-
humor in that. It was a serious example, but I had to who can ignore the humor in it, Like, imagine, who would think that at the moment my insurance policy, as you said, it's true, globally, there is a clause. So, okay.
Yes.
Does the insurance company in any way do anything around suicide prevention?
Yeah, they put a 2-year suicide clause in there. So,
But also in terms of education
nope.
around that. I
No.
saw that you do presentations for the construction industry.
Yes, they have the worst suicide rate of any industry in the U.S. Roughly 1,000 people die by accident every year in construction. 6,000 die by suicide. You're 6 times more likely to jump off the building than fall off.
Wow.
What are your thoughts about, in a sense, the reason for that? Is it the access to the lethal means that I can just jump off the building, or are there other reasons why someone in the construction industry is at increased risk?
Oh, yes, there are a number of risk factors. One, it's male heavy, and it's tough so-called tough guys. Big boys don't cry, don't reach out for help. In the United States, 8 out of 10 people who die by suicide these days are men. Women attempt 3 times as often, but men tend to complete because they use a firearm. So you have a male-heavy population workforce. You have an undereducated workforce. Injuries treated with opioids, oftentimes. Seasonal work, supply chain problems, deadlines. So all those things add up to, I guess, why suicide leads the league. I'm sorry, construction leads the league in suicide.
And in your message to those men, those workers, what do you think reaches them the most in your conversation with them?
Well, I tell my story to begin with. Comedian talking about depression and suicide. How does that work? And we talk about what we talked about with you guys, about my family, about my near suicide, about knowing the taste of the barrel of my gun. And men don't generally talk about those things out loud, things that important like that out loud. So I get their attention right away with that. And Brene Brown says, and I believe it, that vulnerability as a speaker, vulnerability on stage is a superpower. And twice in the last year, a meeting planner said to me after we got done, I'm watching them watching you, and not one of them is looking at their phone. So if you can capture somebody's attention for 45 minutes and keep their face out of their phone, apparently that's a metric nowadays in terms of how engaged they are. And I believe a speaker should move them emotionally. I make them laugh, I make them cry. I make them laugh, make them cry. Because I get choked up on stage when I tell some of my stories. And they can tell I'm on the verge of tears. So I think that's what makes me relatable, makes me engaging, compelling, is that for me, it's not academic, what I'm telling them. It's lived experience. And I just booked an engagement in Missouri in September. And they said, Frank, we've had suicide prevention speeches every year. It's Safety Week or something. Always construction people. We've never had somebody with lived experience. Somebody who, knows the taste of the barrel of their gun. So that's why they chose me for this year. They want somebody who's come close.
Is it ever depressing for you? I don't know, on the one hand, it's inspiring, right? And you're helping others. But the topic itself of suicide, depression, lives lost, can be, it can make us unhappy. That's
Yeah,
probably sometimes why we don't talk about it.
one of the many reasons we don't talk about it. It's frightening as well. No, it's very therapeutic for me. Somebody asked me, does telling your story over and over trigger you? No, you got it backwards. The fact that when I speak at the end, we do a little general Q&A, and I say, look, if you got a story you want to share or a question you want to ask, and you don't want to ask in front of everybody, I'll hang out an extra 30, 45 minutes, take them individually. And there's always a line, sometimes 2 people, sometimes 10. And I've heard the most amazing, I feel like George Bailey in the movie It's a Wonderful Life. I've been shown what these people's lives might be like if I simply wasn't there to speak and then hear their story. I was in Cincinnati, and I was on a construction site, and I spoke. And at the end, there were half a dozen guys lined up, which is unusual, guys lined up. The last one was an African-American gentleman, and he's crying so hard he cannot speak. And I said, after he gathered himself, I said, what's up? He said, I haven't slept in 2 nights. I work on the 5th floor. I think about jumping off every day. And I said, why is that? And he said, because I've lost 3 people in the last year to violence, including my daughter who died in my arms. And I feel like somebody pulled a pin on that grenade, drop in your lap. So the human resources guy that hired me was standing right there. And I said, excuse me, come here a minute. You need to go inside and get the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program binder, find the nearest mental health facility to where we're standing right now, and take this gentleman by the hand and get him there immediately because he's circling the drain. And a couple of months later, I was talking to the same human resources fellow, and I'm just terrified to ask whatever happened. I get my nerve up. I said, whatever happened to that nice African-American gentleman? He said, Frank, he got evaluated, he got medicated, he's back on the job. So that for me is extremely therapeutic. So it doesn't depress me, it doesn't trigger me. I'm just glad that I can take, what I did was I took my pain, turned it into passion, passion into purpose. And I'm just delighted my goal is to save a life a day, and I would say that day, he was the life I saved.
So important, right? Sharing your story and the work that you're doing, right? And what embodying that, I guess it's not only vulnerability, it's humanity, like I'm a human being, right? This is what I've experienced in my life. Let me share and let me shine a light on this. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. And something else Brene Brown said, I had said it many times, many different ways, but she said it the best, I think. And I believe this of myself. She said, I'm so comfortable in my darkness, I can sit comfortably with you in yours.
That's true.
That presence, that being with someone, right, allows the, in a way, it allows the help to be accepted, right?
Yes.
No judgment, no shame, no blame, not forcing someone, right? But being with them, right?
Yes, and I was in a college, and a young one came up afterwards and said, "Can I give you a hug?" And this is at the height of the Me Too movement. Everybody in the room's got a phone with a video camera in it, and I just, in my mind, I saw the headline in the newspaper the next day. Speaker gropes co-ed. So I said, sure. And then I gave her a hug, and I pushed my pelvis back as far as I possibly could. Very brotherly hug. I said, then what's with the hug? She goes, well, I've been in therapy for 2 years. The woman is very good. She has all sorts of diplomas hanging on the wall. But I'm sitting in the back listening to your little keynote, and 15 minutes in, I'm thinking, this guy is inside my head. She goes, the therapist I've got is good, but she has no context. You did more for me in 45 minutes than she's done for me in 2 years. So that's the blessing that I had to be able to share and do that.
That you're also highlighting peer support, right, with those with mental health experience who should be part, I'm going to say should be, but also are part of the resources available to help someone when they're in distress. I wanted to ask you something else about gun use, right? And Kino and I had a gentleman named Steve Schneider on, I think it was last week, who works in Oregon for, I think it's the Alliance for Safe Oregon. He's the head of their suicide prevention, program related to gun use. What are your thoughts about gun safety and how we can help those that own guns to lock them up, get them out of the house for their own safety, their children's safety? Because that's a key factor. Gun use is a leading cause of suicide death is by guns, right? Isn't it even more than murder is suicide by the use of a gun?
I know the suicide rate is higher than automobile accidents and murder combined, and natural disasters. I think gun safety is very important for a variety of reasons. I think if there are children in the house or children going to be in the house, there should be a gun lock or gun safe. It should be put someplace that the child cannot get their hands on the weapon. I'm not a big believer in red flag laws. I guess I'm a little agnostic on that. Taking away someone's, now, if someone has been involved in intimate partner violence, I would say take the guns away. But someone who's not, it's a little. I'm not convinced that that's the proper approach. I could be wrong, but yeah, if it's intimate partner violence, then you need to take their guns. I have two handguns, and including the one I put in my mouth. And I made a deal with my neighbor across the street, Randy. I said, look, Randy, if it takes you bad for me, and I start thinking about those two handguns, I'm going to bring them over to you. I want you to take them from me and not give them back until you hear from my psychologist. So that way you remove the means to die by suicide. So as I like to say, I'm a nut. I'm not a gun nut, but I'm a nut.
Any more thoughts or questions to speak to Frank about?
Yeah, just got one more, Frank. So you've been doing this for quite some time. You come from a media and background. Your first TEDx speech was in 2014, and you said you've done your 13th one, or about to do your 13th one on the topic itself. So from your experience, let's take it back 2014 to date. What, in your opinion, is the state of suicide globally at the moment? Are we making progress when it comes to awareness? Is there anything that we need to fix? Being on these stages, on these powerful stages, where do you think we're going wrong with getting more awareness out there, in your opinion?
Well, overall, we're not doing, if you look at the raw numbers, it's getting far worse. When I did my first TEDx talk, the year before, 39,000 people died by suicide. In 2022, 49,000 and change died by suicide. So if you just look at the raw numbers, things are getting worse. I think if we could allow people to speak out loud about their suicidality without worrying about being locked down for 72 hours, being dragged in front of a judge and they determine you're going to do 3 days locked down in a mental health institution. I was in San Diego doing a comedy gig, and I told my table mates at dinner that I'd also speak on suicide prevention. And I talked about my illnesses. And I was heading to the bathroom, and I could hear somebody coming up behind me. And there's a gentleman actually older than I. And he said, Frank, I have that. He didn't know it had a name, chronic suicidal ideation. He goes, I've got that. And he said to me, I've never told anybody that, not even my therapist. And I know why, because he's in California, and the legal statute is called 5051. If he told his therapist about his thoughts of suicide, they're duty bound to bring them before a judge and decide if they're going to get a 72-hour involuntary hold. So I think I think if we allow people to give voice to their thoughts and feelings surrounding the topic without necessarily putting them in jeopardy of being locked down for 3 days, then we could probably reduce the number of suicides. Something else, you're talking about resources, maybe you're aware of this, National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI. NAMI has a program. Let's say you got someone in your family who has schizoaffective disorder. They've got a 12-week, once a week, one night a week, 12-week course for family members of someone who's dealing with a mental health issue. And I got a friend of mine, a State Farm agent, that saved his family because his son lives with schizoaffective disorder that was breaking the family into pieces. And somebody said, you got to go to NAMI, you got to take that 12-week course. And they also have family-to-family counseling, so you realize you're not alone. Other families are living with it. And they have peer counseling. And the best thing about the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, is everything they do is free.
Yes.
And so that'd be one of the places I start. And then most large counties have a chapter
Yes.
of
I was just at NAMI walks in Northwest Portland, Oregon, had a display table for our Hold On campaign. And May is still happening. There may be other NAMI walks going on across the United States. And it's not just May, right? Every month. They provide excellent service. And as you said, it's free. It's free of charge.
Great resource.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Any final words that you'd like to share with us, Frank?
Yes. Here's the good news. 8 out of 10 people who are suicidal are ambivalent. They cannot make up their mind. 9 out of 10 give hints in the last week leading up to an attempt, which means you can make a difference. You can save a life. And you can do it by doing something as simple as you and I are doing right here, and that is starting a conversation. If you know how, and I would encourage you to know how. In other words, learn the signs and symptoms, what to say and not to say, what to do and not to do, and how to find resources. My job is not to save people from suicide. My job is to empower the audience to save people, to stop a suicide, because I teach them those things so they can spot it in advance and step in.
You're absolutely right in that sense that when someone is on that brink of suicide, albeit they may be still ambivalent, they may not be reaching out for help in that moment, right? And we can't expect them to at that critical moment of crisis. And then it depends on the people around, right? Having the compassion and the forthrightness to reach out to that person and have a conversation with them, and asking directly, are you having thoughts about ending your life? Do you want to die by suicide? Would it be better if you don't wake up in the morning? Do you feel like you're being a burden? Opening up that conversation and knowing that asking those questions is not going to increase their risk of killing themselves. In fact, it's a first step in saving their life. And there are trainings available on how to have a conversation with someone that you have concern about. There's ASSIST, there's QPR training. And Frank disappeared for a moment. Let's see if he comes back.
I thought it was only me, because it tends to happen to me.
Yeah. Frank is joining us from the airport. So something might have happened right now to the connection. Yeah. What he mentioned about, I'm glad you're back.
Yeah, I can't hear you guys for some reason.
Yeah, we see you, Frank.
I've
But he
lost
can't
the audio
hear.
for you guys. I don't know why.
Yeah. I was just sharing the last thing I just was
You guys hear
saying.
me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay.
I was just saying about free trainings and other trainings that are available.
I don't think he can hear you.
You guys, so
He can't hear you.
I will leave you this thought. There's also mental health first aid.
Yes,
Mental health
exactly.
first aid. It's a course, $8.
Can't hear you. No. Trouble with the volume.
He just muted himself. Okay, he's unmuted. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I think okay, let's wrap up.
Yes. No,
Yeah.
don't hear you. No.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to say, I think, goodbye to Frank, right? And it's been a great conversation with him. And
Yeah.
these technological things happen to all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to, in
Yeah, let's
absentia,
wrap
we're
it up.
waving goodbye to Frank. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, bye, Kino.